So before, the idea of a US Bitcoin reserve or the idea of a Bitcoin reserve would have been insane. Now, it's politically acceptable. Bitcoin is becoming a more mainstream asset. People are talking more about it. Like I said before, Larry Fink, BlackRock, Fidelity, all these companies are starting to open their minds to it, open their client exposure to it, all that sort of stuff. So the Overton window is shifting as I read. Pronto, and welcome to episode 3 of Chainspotting, where every week I read and I review 2 of the top stories that happened in Bitcoin and the crypto space. Today, game theory. Is it driving countries to buy Bitcoin to start accumulating, build those strategic reserves, or is this all just hokum? Just inventiveness and sipping on that sweet, sweet pipe from crypto advocates and enthusiasts around the world? We're going to soon find out. And in the second half, we've got another FUD piece. I'm out here, shields on, holding on to dear life, fighting against the people who want to tear us down or that just want to put some counter arguments on the table. Not every piece of criticism is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the seeds of what might put people against actually getting involved in crypto. That one's in the Atlantic, and Lowry, we're going to dive into that. But first, thanks for tuning in. For all you brave and courageous souls that are listening once again this week, I thank you. For those of you that are just tuning in, I also thank you. Can you do me a favor, though? If you hit the subscribe button, it's just below the screen. If you hit the like button, it's just below the subscribe button. And if you comment, I would really appreciate it. The algorithm likes it. It shares it with more people. We get the word, the gospel, the preaching abroad farther and wider and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, comment if you like it, if you don't like it, if you think that nations are actually buying stuff, if you agree with the FUD, feel free. So yeah, let's dive into the first article. This was written in Forbes by Sam Lyman. So Sam Lyman is the director of public policy at Riot Platforms, which is a Bitcoin mining company, one of the biggest in the industry. And it's titled "The Game Theory Driving Nation-State Bitcoin Adoption." Bitcoin skyrocketed to an all-time high of 108,000 last month. Cue some sort of fireworks. Exciting times.
Boys, I'd like to introduce you to the Komodo 3000.
How do we know which one's the Komodo 3000?
Fueling the ascent of the world's largest cryptocurrency is speculation that the United States will embrace Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset after the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump. That's happening on the January 20th. So a week from this recording and a few days from when this is coming out. Newcomers to digital assets, or as I like to call them, pre-coiners, may wonder how a US Bitcoin reserve could drive such a monstrous rally. To understand how Bitcoin managed to appreciate more than 40% in value since Election Day, let's take a closer look at the game theory behind nation-state adoption. Proponents of a strategic Bitcoin reserve believe that the United States has much to gain by being the first developed nation to fully embrace Bitcoin as a reserve asset. Their logic is straightforward. As with any new technology, the greatest benefits accrue to early adopters. And being the first G20 country to adopt Bitcoin as a store of value would all but require other countries to follow suit. The unprecedented success of the Bitcoin ETF serves as a compelling beta test for this idea. Earlier this year, the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF became the fastest growing ETF of all time, surpassing 10 billion in assets under management in just 7 weeks. The value of this ETF has since tripled Today, it stands as the most valuable of all the 1,800 ETFs that have launched in the last 4 years. So a few things to kick us off on the meanderings and musings of my mind as we dive into this. A strategic reserve is essentially holding a specific asset in for when times of crisis come in, to better back the financial system or the banking system of a specific country. It used to be gold, or it still is. Some countries still hold gold. Whether the actual money is backed by that gold, that's a different story. But countries still hold gold as a strategic reserve asset. And now people are starting to propose it. Bitcoin do that. It's an interesting idea. I think it's so there's the pragmatic inside me that says it's inevitable. Countries are going to start adopting it as Bitcoin continues to grow, both in just grassroots adoption as well as value. So countries are just going to start looking at it. I think that Sam makes a pretty good point. Like the ETFs, on one hand, they added legitimacy to the asset class. So like if you have BlackRock, which is the largest asset manager in the world, saying that this is an okay asset, and you see Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, going around and saying how good Bitcoin is, how important it is, what usefulness it has, skeptics are going to start to think, well, now, even though Larry Fink might have ulterior motives behind it, and we can touch on that later or in another piece, the fact that he's going out and saying it is going to warm up investors to actually doing it. Now, there's a lot of speculation whether Trump is going to start building a U.S. Bitcoin reserve asset. Cynthia Lummis, which is the senator from Wyoming, who has been co-sponsoring or who has been sponsoring and pushing a bill forward to create this. I'd like to share a fun fact. The Bitcoin reserve assets bill is one of 2 of the past 30 that Loomis had 0 co-sponsors for. So that's how wildly unpopular this is, despite people on Twitter saying, this is going to happen day one. This is going to be super exciting. This is going to go around like this and this and that. 0 co-sponsors. We're going to still have to see what Trump has to say. Now, the logic is pretty straightforward. Greatest benefits accrue to the earliest adopters. Of course, like we see people who bought Bitcoin back in the day, and whether they are the people with the most power, it's not necessarily, but they have made substantial money as long as they kept those Bitcoin and their private keys. So yeah. Back to the article though. By being bold and by being early, BlackRock has reaped enormous rewards for pushing the Overton window in favor of Bitcoin. So too, the thinking goes, would the United States. So for those of you that are wondering, the Overton window, it was named after Joseph Overton. So it's the range of subjects and arguments politically acceptable to the mainstream population at any given time. So you can think of it as gay rights or as abortion. These before used to not be acceptable to talk about, or they used to be ideas that were just so progressive or so advanced that they couldn't happen. But then the Overton window, both from grassroots conversation, from politicians, from different leaders in cultural, social, and political sectors started accepting it, and it started shifting the Overton window for what is okay to talk about. So before, the idea of a US Bitcoin reserve or the idea of a Bitcoin reserve would have been insane. Now, it's politically acceptable. Bitcoin is becoming a more mainstream asset. People are talking more about it. Like I said before, Larry Fink, BlackRock, Fidelity, all these companies are starting to open their minds to it, open their client exposure to it, all that sort of stuff. So the Overton window is shifting as I read. BlackRock's embrace of Bitcoin sent a clear signal to the rest of Wall Street. Bitcoin is a legitimate asset class and is worthy of institutional adoption. By the same token, the United States' embrace of a strategic Bitcoin reserve would send a clear signal to the rest of the world. Bitcoin is a form of digital gold and is worthy of treasury adoption. And by being the first developed nation to hold Bitcoin as a reserve asset, the United States would benefit most from the explosive network growth that would follow. This is the pro-Bitcoin argument for the strategic reserve in a nutshell. To break it down further, consider looking at the idea through the lens of game theory. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if the US started adding Bitcoin, and we're starting to see it now, certain other countries are quote unquote front running the United States. I had another article that I considered speaking about today, which is Bhutan's crypto reserve could pave the way for economic growth in other countries. That's very interesting because of what it proposes for emerging markets and for countries that don't have the world reserve currency. So, like, the US is kind of not against the wall, but it's kind of in an uneasy position because it has to protect itself and it has to protect the US dollar. Countries like Bhutan, like Chile, Argentina, Nigeria, Mexico, Thailand can start thinking about these alternative currencies to start building up their reserves, and start to, yeah, be at the forefront of the next reserve assets or the next world reserve currency. Who knows what's upon us? Excuse me. Satoshi's logic applied to nation states. I like that little sub-segment, to be honest. Most traditional economists missed Bitcoin. I'm going to say that they haven't missed Bitcoin because there's a common trope in Bitcoin that says, you're still early, we're still early. So they haven't missed it, just saying. Because they fixated on its technical properties and its practicality as a form of money, while altogether ignoring the game theory behind its adoption. Satoshi Nakamoto described this game theory in a Bitcoin Talk forum as far back as 2009. It might make sense just to get some in case it catches on. If enough people think the same way, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's something that was the quote from Satoshi. In game theory vernacular, what Satoshi described in just 2 sentences was a coordination game. In this coordination game, players have 2 choices: adopt Bitcoin or ignore it. If players assume the Bitcoin network will continue to grow, as it has exponentially for the last 15 years, there's only one rational choice: adopt. Why? One might ask. Because assuming continued price appreciation over the long term, any player who ignores Bitcoin will put themselves at a competitive disadvantage against those who adopt. Consider the game theory matrix below to visualize the dynamics at play. And note the Nash equilibrium circled in orange. In game theory, the Nash equilibrium describes the most rational choice an actor can make based on the choices of other actors. So for those of you that are wondering, game theory is a branch of mathematics. It essentially analyzes strategies for dealing with situations where your outcome depends directly on the outcomes of others, or not directly, but critically on the outcomes of others. And so what Sam is proposing here, and what Satoshi proposed, and a lot of people have spoken about before, is that there's going to be a game theory adoption in nation states. That country, my quote unquote competitor, or even if it's, I guess all countries are competitors, even if they pretend to be collaborators and allies. That's a whole can of worms that I'd love to touch upon one day. Leave me a comment if you think that's an interesting idea, like how countries are actually competitors and like adversaries, even if they call it themselves allies and collaborators. I wonder what people from what do you call it, that group of non-aligned nations, the ones that weren't aligned with the US during the Cold War. Again, fact check me, please. It won't be hard. Usually what I say is not consistent with the facts. But yeah, will countries adopt it, and will they rush to adopt it? We're going to see. And that is what we're seeing. I'd like to bring in a second article, a segue article in between, which is that this is from Helen Brown at CoinDesk. So Bhutan, a small country in Southeast Asia that owns over 1.1 billion in Bitcoin, on Wednesday announced that one of its cities adopted a crypto reserve asset strategy. This could help the country attract foreign capital and strengthen its economy, which is at risk of declining as the country's fiscal deficit is expected to widen. The move could set an example for other countries that could use available renewable energy to mine Bitcoin and adopt a crypto reserve strategy. Bhutan is interesting because they hold 1.1 billion that they've mined using renewable energies. That's another topic, how renewable energies and Bitcoin integrate and coalesce. But yeah, game theoretics at play. Bhutan is quite at the forefront. Did you know that they have a happiness index? There's an economist whose name I do not recall right now, but he's super famous, and my dad must be mind exploding that I do not remember his name. Jeffrey Sachs, could it be? Yes. Who's been growing and been adopting all this happiness index stuff. And yeah, I don't know if he's made any comments about Bitcoin itself. I'm sure that he has something to do with this, whether he's okay, whether he's a dissenting voice, anything like that. But I find Bhutan interesting, and it's part of this like larger cog of nation state adoption. Back to Sam, though. In game theory terms, a coordination game best describes the logic driving nation state Bitcoin. The point: economists can quibble all they want about the merits of Bitcoin as a form of money, but they can't ignore that the Nash equilibrium in a coordination game driven by positive network effects is to cooperate with other players, that is, to buy Bitcoin. This logic has been the rocket fuel behind Bitcoin's meteoric rise across 3 levels of adoption. First, among individuals, then institutions, and soon, coming to a theater near you, nation states. If Bitcoin's recent price action is any indication, we appear to be in the opening minutes of nation state adoption. The clock is ticking. And in a game like this, there's no calling time out. The question Sam poses us: will the United States pick up the ball, or will other countries get there first? This is a fascinating idea. A great article, by the way. Congrats, Sam. I liked it because it was nice, simple, clear, straight to the point. Not this long, drabby, drawn out, comment ridden stuff. Just like, nah, this is game theory. Nash equilibrium, by the way, is there's a mathematician who created this, whose name is John Nash. And yeah, he was always playing with this idea of what's the most rational choice an actor can make based on the choices of other actors. I think it should be important to say that economic actors, and this has been widely discredited or widely like accepted now, that economic actors don't always make the most rational choices because we're driven by politics, we're driven by cultural factors, we're driven by emotions, we're driven by empathy and altruism. Although, is there altruism working inside the government? That's yet to be seen. I don't really know. Putting it out there. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure it's as simple as this is the rational choice, so you should be doing it, even though that's what Sam is proposing. Now, do I think that there is a sort of rush to start buying Bitcoin, or countries that are starting to think about Bitcoin as a reserve asset, and not necessarily as like El Salvador, who tried to use it as money, even though like Bukele has backtracked up on that. And now it's still legal, but it's not enforced. And they've sort of, backpedaled a little bit. But I do think that we're going to start to see countries think about, all right, maybe not use Bitcoin, but like start adding it to our reserves, start accumulating, start thinking about what the different custody options are. And a lot of eyes are on January 21st, like I said in my previous video, which is the day after Trump gets elected. Do I think that he's going to start adding Bitcoin to the US Bitcoin reserve day one? Fucking impossible. Do I think it's going to happen during his administration? Possible. How likely? I don't know, man. I'm not one of the people whispering in his ears, whether that's David Sachs, the crypto czar, or David Bailey, the Bitcoin magazine czar. So it's hard to say, but I do think that, and like Bhutan is doing it, and I do think that there's a huge case for countries and emerging markets that want to sort of drain a little bit of the US's influence around the world, and just general like sovereign influence around the world. What's the point of Bitcoin? It's an asset that can't be seized, that can't be confiscated. that has a fixed supply. And then most importantly, it does not belong to any specific centralized power, whether that's the US, whether that's JP Morgan, whether that's my good self. So it makes sense that countries should start adapting a neutral monetary asset just as a hedge, just as protection. I'm not saying go and like put all of your money in it, but 0.1%, 1%, 1.5%. That can grow exponentially. Then you can reshuffle, reshift, re-risk, all that sort of stuff. But there's definitely something to be said for this idea. Now, will other countries get there first? They are getting there. I think what Sam is alluding to a little bit is the idea of G20 countries. Because, yeah, Bhutan doesn't really register on many people's maps. But, like, Germany started selling all their Bitcoin low. But, yeah, will other big countries, important countries, countries that have reserve currencies, Japan, Switzerland, Canada, the UK, will they start talking about these ideas? They will be the slowest, no doubt, except maybe a country like Switzerland. But yeah, they will be the slowest. And I think that's what he's alluding to. But we're starting to see it here in other countries. I think it's really interesting. I'm really intrigued by what's going to happen. I do think that if the US, or not if the US, when the US decides to come forward and say that they will, that even if the Bitcoin that they already have seized and that they hold is part of their reserve asset, it's going to create a frenzy. And that will it be the ultimate legitimization of Bitcoin? I'm not entirely sure. It will be for traditional people. For me, it's not, but it will be for traditional people, for other countries, for leaders, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, then the floodgates will open and everybody is going to come rushing in. And yeah, countries will flourish by the hand of the government, reaping the benefits of Bitcoin adoption for us. And that's all we have for the first part of this show. What did you think? Did you enjoy the episode? Did you like what the conversation was about? Do you agree or disagree with anything I said? Remember, subscribe, like, comment. That would be wonderful. By the way, chainspottingpod.com. I publish alongside this podcast a weekly newsletter with more digestible stuff, with more. I share in a few thoughts. I share in a few tweets that are accompanying this. I share what books I'm reading and what's been interesting over the past week, what crypto events are happening. So definitely head there and check it out. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to choose your news, and I'll read you later.